is that it allows us to, once a year, kind of step back from our day-to-day work. If you're like me, you know it's really hard to get so focused on what you do on a day-to-day basis. You get so intensively into your own creations, the marketing of your creations, the world that revolves around your own creations, that it's really hard to step back and look at the forest and see what the health of the forest is and see what changes have taken place that are going to impact us for the next year. Those changes can be wide-ranging. They can come in the creative world. They can be a whole new approach to app development or to what's possible. They can be in the technology world, new devices, new uses for devices that allow us to do something we weren't able to do before. They can be in the policy world. We're, about 6 weeks out now from the new COPPA laws, the updated COPPA laws that will change things radically for a number of people.
Is it COPPA or COPPA?
COPPA. There is also a COPPA with one P. And COPPA is with two. So as I said, it can be creative, it can be technology, it can be policy, it can be research that's telling us about how families and children are using digital technologies, touchscreen technologies. And so we wanted to take this moment right at the beginning of AppCamp just to get some opinions from a range of experts on the panel, people who are in development, but also people who come from the education side. When Carly gets here, people who come from the research side, to try to get a little bit of framework that's going to help us for the next couple days of where we stand right now. I'm really quick to say, though, that this is not a case where the experts are up here and the audience is down there. This is a case where all of us are experts. We've got a range of people up here who I'm going to get to start the ball rolling, but really quickly I want to get to you. And I want to get to you not only for questions, but for your own expertise about what's happening out there right now. So I'm going to do the very shortest possible introduction of the panel. It's really just going to be names and organizations or companies. Next to me, I've got Gail Lovely from Lovely Learning. Next to Gail is Caroline Flexer from Duck Duck Moose, an AppCamp habitué. Probably every AppCamp? Every AppCamp. Dan Russell-Pinson, who also has been here a number of times and who's demoed some of his works as well from Freecloud. And Björn Jeffery, who you'll hear with a keynote right after this from Toca, Boca. And exciting year for them in a lot of ways as well. And Carla Shuler from PlayCollective will be joining us in a minute, I hope. I'm going to throw out the broadest possible question that I provided you in advance, so I hope you've got your answers ready to get us started. And that's just, for you, what was the most significant development in the app world in the past year? And again, it can come from any of those aspects of the field that I mentioned before. Björn, can we start down at your end?
Sure. I think that when we had this panel last year, I think a lot of the prophecies turned out to be somewhat true. I think we said that there was going to be a large sort of push to, I don't want to say professionalization, but sort of money and focus moving into the space. So the whole industry may be growing up a little bit, and I think that's what we've seen. I think there's a lot more sort of larger players, and some of the larger players that we knew from before, sort of the older guard have taken things a little bit more seriously, some more than others, but nevertheless. Just a general sort of quality increase and just also a quantity increase. There's a lot of new stuff, and there's a lot of new stuff from brands that you know well, but a surprising amount of things that you've never heard of, which is also surprisingly good, which I think is both interesting and a little challenging.
And we're going to definitely come back to that question of a lot more quantity, because I'm going to be very interested in questions around things like curation of the space and helping parents find what's right for their kids. So we'll come back to that in a bit. Yeah.
I mean, I think the COPPA laws that you mentioned are a big thing. It remains to be seen how that plays out, but I think that affects a lot of the smaller players. I think it's just one more hurdle for a small person to grasp and deal with. I'll second what Bjorn said about the larger players coming in, because I'm, a one-man shop, so I'm very conscious of, am I going to get pushed out, or do I have to grow? That's like my question for the next year or two. Like, do I have to grow? Do I have to become a 5-person company or a 10-person company just to maintain a position that I have or to go forward?
Thanks.
I would echo a lot of the things that Björn had said as well in terms of, I think in the last few years we've seen a lot of people dipping their toe into the App Store. And this past year was really big investment into the App Store. So big children's media companies and larger companies really coming in. Like, they're not testing things anymore. They're really coming in with big investments both from the development side, but also on the business side and on the marketing side. So there are apps that are being advertised on TV, and it's no longer, it's becoming increasingly difficult to be a company that doesn't do anything on the marketing front. So I think it's just definitely professionalization of the market.
That's where we're going to hit Carly as soon as she comes in the door, because when she was with the Joan Jans Cooney Center, she did a study for them that a couple of years ago indicated that the big names, the big brands, the Nickelodeons and Disneys and that, were not dominating the App Store. We're not showing up necessarily, at least in the education part of the store, as the top providers. And I'm wondering if I want to hear if she's done research or if there's been new research that suggests that's changing. Yeah.
So one of these things is not like the others. I come from the education world, and the big change in education is there's a lot less of no, never, and a lot of how do we do this. There's a lot of pilot projects that are becoming district-wide iPad and other tablet implementations. And so there's been a huge, I think, shift in the wind in K-12 and even pre-K. And that, I think, is going to create some different push in what apps and how they're run.
Well, let's go straight to the question of curation and how both parents and also educators are finding things in the App Store. How do you, with so much more content there, have you seen any developments in the last year that are really helping parents and educators find what's right for their particular children, for their educational needs? Anyone want to jump into that first?
Well, I've got the mic. I think it's really a struggle, and in education there isn't a sign-off or a approved app list. And there are some, Appalicia's just started Apple Learning, and so maybe that's going to get some traction. There are a lot of blogs and other tools that are getting traction, but it's a challenge because of the shifting sands of standards and those kinds of things. So I don't think it's an easy answer yet, but I think there's a lot of interest, which is new. It's not just about what's free anymore.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that there's no clear place for curation yet. There are a lot of people doing some interesting things, commentary media. I think there's Appalicious. There are a lot of different places, but for parents too, some of them don't go to app review sites. So I think that's still very fragmented area.
Well, I mean, I think the main place people would think to go is the App Store itself. And in the iOS App Store, there's basically just one big category called education. So you have sex education and GRE and Dora the Explorer all in the same category. So I think that's an obvious problem that should be easy to fix. I know that in the Google I/O conference recently, they announced plans to have a Google Play education category with categorized and curated categories. So that'd be interesting to see if they force Apple to do the right thing.
I think just adding to what everyone else has said, I think there were and still is quite a few startups in this space, but none have really emerged as the clear leader, and none really emerged as any place that I think a substantial amount of parents go to on a regular basis. So there's a lot of startups with ambitions to curate and select from different parameters, some educational and some others, but we're not seeing any one which is sort of in a big way actually impacting app downloads or really getting any traction among others than developers, hoping that this will help them get out of the world. But I don't think it's really reaching a lot of parents, which is unfortunate. So I would probably agree with them. Apple is the primary curator still, even after this past year.
Let's come at it from the other direction then. Have you seen any innovation among app developers? Is there anyone, it can be your own work or it can be somebody else's, who's really come up with an innovative way of marketing apps to parents to help them find, from the mass of the app stores, to help them find their way to their particular product?
I think a lot of people are trying. You can see the scales from the very gentle and nice to the extremely aggressive and unpleasant. And unfortunately, a lot of the latter works quite well from a ranking position. You see a lot of apps and we look at them and we completely understand how they got there and feel that that is not something that we can do. But you understand it. It's just methods and sort of in your face, literally, in these apps, which is difficult, especially in this sector. So the things that work, that don't fall into that category, I suppose, is a parental locked cross-promotion system, which is what I think the developers that have multiple apps are seeing some success with. It's a way of just telling parents that this exists, and then you can't really go into lengthy detail of exactly what it is, but it's one of the few ways that it's sort of a self-curation of some sort, which I think I'm seeing in a lot of developers and several others here using the same thing.
Using the relationship that you've established with parents to help cross-promote across your...
It comes back to the quality of the app that you have in question. If the app that you're in is great, then chances are that parents might think, I wonder if they've done something else, which is a reasonable question. If the app is not great, then they will not ask that question, therefore cross-promotion won't work. So the quality of the app is still by far the most important parameter for marketing, I would say.
Other answers to that? See.
Yeah, I basically just rely on word of mouth is the main thing I rely on, but that's not something you can, and cross promotion. But it's like the chicken and the egg situation. So if you have a portfolio of apps that are seen as high quality, then you can utilize that. I don't know how the startup starts.
Does that portfolio have to be across a very similar type of apps? I mean, you were showing me some of your new work, and it's very different from what you've shown us in the past years. Does the cross-promotion help you there, or when you're working for a different audience, is it almost like a whole new company?
Yeah, ask me in a couple months.
Okay. Remind me next year.
Yeah, I think we're constantly in this market. It's challenging because, yes, the cross-promotion with a parental lock is the right experience to have for young children and parents. It's really limiting it from a business standpoint. So I think, like in mass gaming and gaming environments, there are tactics that you can use with timing, with surfacing information, and that makes a lot of sense for adults who are playing the game and adults who have the purchasing power and can make those decisions. But when you're designing something for a child, you can't do that, and you just don't want to do that. But there are players in the space that are monetizing and that are really building big businesses by taking advantage of this. But I don't think they're building a sustaining brand or kind of long-term experience for parents and kids.
One thing we're seeing in education is this pressure from parents to the educators. What should I be getting for my child? What apps should we get? And so I begin to see a little bit of that kind of pressure. Pressure's not probably the right word, but this kind of, let's help the schools tell the parents what's appropriate and vice versa. So there's some interesting kinds of things I think that might be coming.
That's one of the areas where we've gotten ourselves in trouble as an industry in the past, is the sort of what should my child, and then leading to then, whether it's app developers, game developers, software developers, children's TV developers, trying to tell parents outcomes. This is going to make your kid smart. Get my app because your kid will be smart. Are we seeing any change in that? Are we making false promises, or are we starting to develop a language of honest communication with parents and educators?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think there's a little of each. I think the generic answer I hear most in schools and in that parent-school connection is, it's too early to know. And so it's an easy answer to give, even if it's not really too early to know, but it makes a safe spot. So it's, it kind of depends a little bit on what kind of apps we're talking about.
Carly, you nodded when Carly Shuler's joined us. You nodded when I asked that.
Oh, sure. Hi, sorry I'm late. I just nodded because I think it's a good question, and I don't know what you guys talked about already, but I think the school market is something that really, I mean, last year we sat on this panel and we talked about it being an important ancillary to your business, and I think now there's a lot of people who are really diving into the school market, so I'm excited to see true, effectiveness and outcome measures as people really dive into that market.
Let me come back to the first question I asked everyone, just so you get a chance to weigh in. And that's the most significant development that you've seen in the last year. That can come from technology, from business, from creative, just the one thing that really jumped out at you.
Yeah, I would say this school thing is really jumping out at me. The only other thing probably people start to talk about this is true brands being built with, app developers, like true brands. So I'm excited to see, the first forays of brands into other mediums, the way that, we see Angry Birds and all sorts of other mediums. Now I'll be interested to see Toca, Boca, or Educator. I'll be interested to see if their characters go into other mediums, because there really are true brands now that parents relate with and kids relate with the characters.
One of the things that came up earlier, just before you got here, was something that came up in the research that you did when you were at the Coney Center, and that had to do with the big media brands in the app space, the Disneys, the Nickelodeons, and at the time, in the education part of it at least, they weren't a big presence. Has that changed at all with the emergence of brands, or are they staying away from the education part, but big players in the rest of it?
No, I think they're in the education section of the App Store now. I think the brands are in the education
And having an impact there, or are parents, are they eager to say, or are they willing to say, oh, Nickelodeon, I see that as educational?
I think they're buying them. Yeah, I think they're selling. This is anecdotal, I don't have research on it, but I think that parents are seeing them and I think they're selling. But I think that there's, some great content there's much better content maybe from some other places rather than the...
You were just saying schools are not?
I don't see a lot of the commercialized character, big name brand stuff in schools at this point. I mean, there's not a lot of Disney apps in a school setting. That doesn't speak necessarily about what's happening at home as an education app, but in the education space, that crossover is not real strong at this point.
Let's jump to content trends. Give each of you a chance to raise any either magic or dust content or creative trends that you've seen in the last year. Anything come to mind?
I think something which was around but is worth emphasizing because it's had such an impact is still Minecraft. I think dozens of clones doing surprisingly well for being a clone still, and just a Swedish, anecdotally, team which has made something which has had such a significantly higher impact than I would have ever thought. These are some friends of mine that work at this company, and I would never have invested in this, and I would have been completely wrong, which is an interesting thing. I think the openness of the design is something which has been rare in this space before, something which is so open and so seemingly unpolished but elegant in its own right, which is doing exceptionally well from a business side too, is sort of inspiring that everything does not have to look the same. I think that is a clear sign that you can succeed in this space with something which is significantly different, and I think Minecraft is a good example of that.
Other thoughts on either dust or magic, content trends, creative trends?
I think overall, in terms of trends, at the top end, in terms of magic, the quality continues to be get better and better on all dimensions. The content, the interactivity, the resources that are used to develop these apps. I think gone are the days of a 5-week dev cycle like we had seen in the past, and and then on the dust side of things, there are a lot of things in the kids space that are sort of focused on the monetization and not really focused on the kids' experience. And I think I was just looking at that in terms of what's overdone. The top 9 of the top 23 games in the kids space are makeup related apps. So there's art nail, wedding salon, movie style makeover, wedding day makeover, makeup touch, princess makeup. It's just a bit overdone.
Is that Is there some reason beneath the surface for that? You know, that if one rises to the top, people start looking for others? That seems really strange that one very specific area should have that many of the top spaces.
Possibly, I think it's probably a popular topic. My issue with that particular set are they're the ones that are just really aggressively marketed. They're not good experience. I can see an app with that subject that could be designed, you know, really beautifully or in a creative way, but
does it say anything about the gender skew of apps these days, or?
Not necessarily. I'm not seeing that. Yeah, in this particular segment.
I think some of that may be related to the poor search capabilities of the iOS store, and that if you have a topic like that maybe someone's interested in, all of those pop up, and it's very hard to search or refine the searches. And in fact, you know, makeup is one word, 2 words, hyphenated word, it gets a whole different set of apps, and so that makes room for a lot of clutter.
Well, I think you've reached the topic that probably is on almost everyone's minds out here these days, and that's the financial underpinnings of the industry and how you can make a go of it in the app world today. I just did a presentation, and it's past it. How far is that likely to go? I did a presentation at a conference in Toronto earlier this week, where I was on a panel about ethics and marketing of apps, and I was in the communication with an app developer who's been reasonably successful, who sent me some research that had been done that showed that a sizable percentage of parents said they would never pay more than $5 for an app. He said, 3 years of my life, and it's worth less than a latte to them. I found, 39%, I think it was, in this survey of parents who said that they look first for free apps and only will pay if they really have to. We've gone in an amazingly short amount of time from parents willing to pay $40, $50 for a piece of packaged software, for a console game, to parents who complain about 99 cents for an app. Have you seen anything in the last year, since we're doing the one-year catch-up here, that looks like a promising financial model for a developer that you can sustain it, for parents that they'll be willing to buy and accept? Anything that you've seen come out?
Well, it seems like you can either do advertising in your app, which of course we don't do that, and then you can do in-app purchasing, which, if done right, that is a way to go, but some parents are leery of that. So, in my point of view, I'm sort of stuck with paid upfront apps. I mean, just by default. I haven't seen much change in customers willing to pay more. I have light versions of all my apps that are free, and I always get comments saying, I can't afford it, even though it's 99 cents. You know, complaining that the free app doesn't give them everything the full version does. So I haven't seen any more willingness to spend more money.
I think the overall trend, looking sort of beyond the kids and education space, is definitely that everything is going to freemium. In a way, that is quite beneficial for us, I think, because I'm speaking as us as a collective, because I think the willingness to pay is sort of higher to buy great products for your kids than maybe you're willing to spend on your own. And the trend to freemium means that a lot of these apps are moving away from the paid top list onto the free top list, which is now exceptionally competitive. And the paid top list is, I wouldn't say empty, but more empty than it was a year ago. So a lot of great brands, a lot of sort of massive development time that's been put into things end up on a free chart, which means that we can sort of coincide in another way. I think the paid chart is probably not less competitive, but the free chart is considerably more competitive than it was just 12 months ago.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I don't know that I have that much to add here, but I'll share some research that we did tomorrow night, and it talks about what parents are willing to pay for apps versus ebooks. And at least according to our research, it does seem like parents are willing to pay a little bit more than they used to, and they're willing to pay more for ebooks than apps. So hopefully, you know, when you're just selling it outright, there is a little bit of an increase in value perception amongst parents.
Gail, anything emerging in the education world that presents any possibilities for developers to monetize apps?
Well, the paid in-app purchases are a real problem in education. It pretty much takes you off the list because it's very difficult to, if I have 20 iPads, to do in-app purchases for each iPad is not an easy situation. So in education, in a school setting of education, paying up front is way simpler for schools. And school systems are beginning to realize that that's a good choice and it's a good option because it gives them stability and in many cases reliability that are critical because if a teacher uses something and it doesn't work, they never go back and their kids don't either. So I think we're beginning to see that schools are more willing to pay. That's an important piece. How much they're willing to pay is still a problem. There is a barrier there that I think is unreasonable, but I think we're getting closer to understanding that paying is important and that free may be a disservice in the longer run. And I really do see, and I work with schools all over the place, and I'm really seeing that as a big turning point. At the same time, I think we're beginning to see some big companies with very expensive apps, and those are posing interesting questions and challenges to schools. And if I buy an app that's $129, that's a sizable commitment. And so there are some of those kinds of things coming down now, these bigger packages, and that may actually help the smaller apps creep up in price and be a little more acceptable.
It's interesting you say it because I was just wondering if there's any element here of a maturing industry, that when the app world is brand new and parents, it's a little untested, these things feel small somehow to parents, you buy them more like a snack than the way you might buy a big packaged software piece. But as the industry matures and as parents get used to it and see the value of it, do we see any evidence that they'll be willing to pay more? Get a little further away from those first days. Pure speculation.
No one wants to talk on
No one wants
that
to. Okay, that's fine. Yes, Mr. Buckleitner has a question.
Yes, I have a question. I wanted to just amplify what Gail said. I just came off judging the Bologna Prize, and we got 250 products, and we didn't even look at free stuff. We were too busy. I kind of like Dan's model, where you have a light version, but then you have a full version. So you have the option, and you know it's free. I get a taste. But there is an option. Schools are not going to buy a free, yes, they will actually. They will download tons of free junk. But I think they're moving into the second evolution, and they're finding out that it's just time. I don't have time. It's worth $1. I've also seen a trend, and Björn, I think it might be a case study where you increase the price by 100% or double the price on some of the apps from 99 cents to $1.99. I know that's a huge chasm. It's a big gutsy move for Toca, but I think my theory on this is, and I'd love to hear what you guys think, is that there are some of you that are establishing brand name and value, and parents are trusting it, and they just buy it. They see a Duck Duck Moose, and they know it's going to be good. And that didn't exist a few years ago. And so I'm hoping that that's happening, and you guys can make a living. But I just really want to emphasize, be very careful. Free is a 4-letter word. It's okay if you've got great stuff to charge for.
Reactions to that?
I think there's also some of the App Store mechanics that affects this as well, because it's so crowded and you're relying on visibility on the App Store. If you charge a really high price because the rankings are based on number of downloads as opposed to overall, they do have a gross revenue listing, but the rankings at the top are based on number of downloads. So if you charge a high price, it's harder to get higher on the list.
Yeah, I would second that, and it's even more dramatic than you might describe. I mean, going from 99 cents to $1.99, you can just see the difference between night and day. So you might be like 25 on the charts, and you raise it to $1.99, and you might just fall almost to where you can't be seen anymore. It's only 99 cents or $1 more.
Yeah, we've been doing a lot of price testing this year. I think it matters where people find out about the app. That's the thing. So I think to your point, what we're trying to do is to establish a brand that people know and recognize to have a certain level of quality. And we're hearing that from certain parents saying, I'll buy your apps unseen. It doesn't matter what it is. So even if there's a few people that will do that, and then others, I think if you hear it based on recommendation, then your price will be higher. Because it's the risk, if you put it that way. And it seems silly talking about risks when we're talking about $1.99 or $2.99 again, with the coffee comparison. But if there is a greater risk, I think, that people are unwilling to take, if you don't know that it's going to be good. But if someone has actively recommended, you should really try this app, it's amazing, then $2.99 is not a problem, especially it's not if it's for your kids, I think.
This is sort of anecdotal and also just based on some qualitative research we've done. We have heard some parents saying that they're now staying away from free, which is kind of nice because I think they're seeing that, trusting that there aren't going to be, in-app purchases, which they, I think there's some great apps and some great ways to do in-app purchases, but staying away from them because they know that they can just pay up front, and so there might be a little bit of an evolution towards that we'll see, especially with all these brands being built.
I had a comment from a developer recently who was talking about in-app purchases, that if it's a consumable, parents are much more worried about it, or parents are much more upset about it than if it's something lasting. If it's a new version, if it's an expansion pack, they're much more open to in-app purchases than if it's smart variants.
Yeah, I think as parents start to see apps more as toys, the way that some of you guys on the panel have talked about, they'll start to make connections like, okay, if I buy Play-Doh, my Play-Doh will eventually run out and dry up, and I can get something new or stuff like that. And that makes sense. There are certain toys that I just want to pay up front. There are certain toys that I might buy expansion packs. So if they see it more as toys, I think new models will emerge. But for now, I think there's a lot of parents who just want to pay up front, and some who do even stay away from free. So hopefully that's good news.
So if you're doing creativity apps out there, make the little markers dry up after a while. Actually, and I want to throw in a model that I just came across about a week ago that to me is a new model. Maybe others have heard about it before, but just so that as we're talking about it over the next few days, you know that this is out there. A Chicago developer who comes out of being a preschool teacher has started, she built into her apps a way for kids safely and securely and simply, one click, to send their parents the things they create in the app. So if you do a drawing, if you complete a puzzle, you can send that to your parents essentially via email. The kid never accesses the email. It's just a one-click thing. And she's getting that sponsored. So her newest app has to do with cakes and geometry, and when a kid makes a cake in the app, they can send it to their parents, and it's sponsored by Eli's Cheesecake. So it arrives on the parents' email with your drawing is brought to you by Eli's Cheesecake, which supports education, almost like a public TV credit. I see potential, I see danger, just want to put it out there so that as we're talking over the next few days, we're talking about a full range of things. Yes, I was just going to ask for questions, comments.
Subscription models, how do people feel about those?
I need to support this mic. I'm not sure this will stretch.
Yeah.
Subscription models.
You guys are the beta panel. We're doing but so far it's working. I think everyone can hear okay. And if you have other questions, this is cool.
Subscriptions. We looked at it. It has it's difficult technically to get that right, I think, and for us it would entail getting into a lot of accounts and account handling and who signs up for the account, and connected to COPPA issues adds a whole nother level of complexity that we would rather avoid. I'm seeing a few doing it. They're not doing very well. I don't think it's due to their business model necessarily. I think it's probably due to the product. But I see more and more relying on that, which is probably a good idea. I doubt, after speaking to some of them, that they understand how, what a commitment that is and what people expect as a paying subscriber. I mean, recurring revenue sounds great, but what sort of a team you have to have behind that. Just in discussions that I've had, again, very anecdotally with a few that have headed into that direction, it seems they're not quite ready for how much they're going to have to deliver consistently. in order for that to work.
Other comments on subscriptions? I will say that a couple of examples I've seen find that it's really difficult to have the depth of content at launch. Find that it's difficult to have the depth of content at launch, that you don't find a lot of kids who work their way through it in the first couple of days, come back and say, I'm bored, and it never gets renewed. Other questions or comments from you? As I say, we're not the experts up here. Yes? Darren's got the mic right down here. I'm going to make you run around. Oh, you're going, okay.
I was speaking to Apple last week, and they're not going to be very happy with light apps anymore. Apps like Toca, where they're free and they're actually great content, they love. If it's a light version of your standard app, then they're not going to look favorably on you. And in fact, they might just flat out reject it. So they just don't want that noise anymore.
We've got a comment up here.
Hi, maybe this question is for Gail, but maybe for all of you. I'm interested in the school market. I've been in this game for a long time, since Apple IIe's. And I've noticed that as the schools become inundated with many, many products, not only software and technology products, but also different approaches to reading or whatever, they began to be encouraged to look for research-based, evidence-based products. And I'm wondering if you see that that's something that that schools are scrutinizing apps for. I've just got a grant from NICHD to do research with the apps I'm developing. And I think it's important for us to be able to say, yeah, we know it works. It teaches kids to read, or whatever you want to teach them. So if we want to be truthful about what we say about our apps, is anybody thinking about doing more research, and do you think schools are going to be demanding more research?
Well, that's a very deep question. I think education is, and I'm speaking tomorrow a little bit more about some of this, but I think it's a very divided field. And, you know, we've changed standards, and we've changed this, and we changed that, and so there's a lot of confusion about where we are and where we're going. And piled on top of that, of course, is, well, what device and what tools and whose research and what does that mean? And there's, you know, a lot of difficulty. There aren't very many research-based things out there. A lot of the schools and school systems I'm working with, their solution to that is they're mostly buying tools as opposed to content, because then they don't have that kind of concern. That if I have a really good tool, it doesn't matter if this year we're doing the Common Core and next year we're doing the Iowa Core and the next year we're doing something else, because the tool will stand alone. I do think, by the way, that's a really ripe space to be in. That tools for education is has longevity and has some legs. Is that the thing?
Have we been around, has this technology been around long enough to have effective research on whether it really works, or are we still too new?
I think there's some things we can point to, and I think, you know, there's some research that says some things, but it's always difficult to say because of this, that, in education. I mean, that's a very difficult thing. No one wants to be their kid who's in the control group. So it's a very challenging thing to do. Do you have some things to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I don't have a great answer to the question, but I will say that I think that last year, I would have said I don't think that this is really happening yet, and I think that, like we talked about, because this kind of content is really going to start to infiltrate education systems in the very near future, and is already starting to, we're going to need to have some research backing this stuff. And I do really, really hope, and I really believe that if you're developing content and saying it's educational, and you have the research to back it up, that it will rise as these things come to the schools. I really believe that. I don't think there's a lot yet, but I really do believe that that's in the very near future, and I wouldn't have said that last year. So I hope so.
Yeah, I have a question about, excuse me, about content. And I know there's a lot of apps out there around in the education space, around standard math, writing, etc. I'm curious if you're seeing a lot more apps in the space of social and emotional learning, and what that looks like right now, and in particular, anything around ethical behavior in kids, like around bullying, how to get that across for kids about not to bully. So curious what you all heard about in that space.
Don't fight over the mic.
Teachers are asking for that. I think depending on the age level you're talking about, I think it's a very difficult thing to do. I've seen some bullying or anti-bullying apps that are out there. There aren't any I've been recommending. If there's someone in the room who can pass them, make sure you see me. There's a lot of requests, but it's a very difficult thing to take as a not between person to person and take it between person to machine or app. And that we're struggling, I think, still to find ways to use these tools as collaborative, cooperative groupthink. And so I think there's a place there for that, but I haven't seen any that I would really recommend. So.
Two questions. I'm looking at the time. We have two questions in the back, and then I'm going to prep the panel. But I want to close with really quick thoughts about coming back. When you come back a year from now to AppCamp, what would you love to be able to say has been the big development of the year? So think about that. But also, we have two questions coming from right here, Darren.
I have a question for Gail. I'm talking from a special education perspective. Previously, it used to be that I used to go to my speech pathologist or OT to ask what software to buy for my kid. Now, it is becoming a reverse side. Parents are telling the speech pathologist, this is what came for me at my home. Why don't you try it in your therapy and find out what is working? So, the trend seems to be that it used to become pulling down from the specialists or teachers. And it is going from parents to the teachers, parents to the rest of the community. Are you seeing that you are finding?
Well, I think you're right. It goes both ways more now than ever before, in that a parent can test something with their child in a unit of one, and a school doesn't necessarily think about purchasing or implementing a system in a unit of one. So parents actually have opportunities to influence what schools do in a different way now than ever before. I think it may be, I shouldn't answer the last question now, but I think that may be one of the things we begin to see is that this app movement is part of what creates new bridges between schools and homes and schools, because we have something to talk about other than a grade or a test or the homework that wasn't turned in, but also what tools can span across that gap.
Yeah, I think the cost is also a factor, because it used to cost $200 for the software, so I don't want to buy it and try. Now I can try it with cents and dollars. How we need it. So that's one.
And you might be trying a smaller subset of something that's much larger in the school, and those recommendations, I think, are going to open up conversations.
As someone who just got off a plane from Beijing 24 hours ago, I'm really curious about what is the biggest trend you're seeing internationally with your apps? I know many of you guys are doing some very interesting things abroad.
Well, I think there's room for improvement. I'm Swedish, and Boca head office is based in Stockholm, so it was very clear that in a country with 9 million inhabitants, there's no domestic market for what we're doing, so we had to go international immediately. We've done intentional design choices like eliminating all text and eliminating all voice for this reason, to make sure that localization is easier, and also to make it a little tougher, but more in doing our own UX and UI, just making sure that it should work no matter where you come from. And I think that is the model forward. I can't say I'm seeing a lot of it. I think it's because it takes more time. It's easier, like on any website or anything, it's easier just to write exactly what you mean, and then you immediately limited yourself to the English language. So I wish I could say that that was a trend. I wouldn't go as far as to say that, but I think that as the App Store grows in so many other markets, I'm thinking that this is a great potential for growth for a lot of app developers out there.
Any other reactions to that, Caroline?
And well, it's more than just translating the text in your app. It's the marketing too. So it's really an easy matter to translate the text of your app to another language, but to really understand the culture of that country and to communicate with reviewers in that country and basically market is a challenge.
Is that true not just of the marketing, but of the content as well? I mean, I come out of the children's television world where the influence of culture on television is huge. You look at programs from around the world that look nothing like what we do here. It can take a lot of sort of figuring out why does that work, where it comes from. So is it beyond just the marketing and the design of the content as well?
Well, I think it is partly, depending on, well, your app is a good example of something which is not as relevant in Sweden. Stacking the States is not something that I spent a lot of time doing when I was a young Swedish boy. But there are other things which is more sort of in the sort of intermediary land. We have things like, we try to choose themes that to a certain extent are international themes. That's part of the selection process, and we have things like in Toca Kitchen, there's a setting, I don't know if you've seen it or not, because it's in the settings app outside of the application, but that has a vegetarian mode. So you can switch that on and all the meat disappears from the fridge. So there's, because everybody eats, everybody has a kitchen more or less, but they don't always eat the same thing. So there are sort of minor adaptations that you can do to make sure that you're maybe not perfectly relevant, but at least not actively offending anyone, which is a good start.
Okay, let's go down the line and see what, when you come back a year from now, you really would like to have seen happen.
Sure, going back to this topic of education and research, I'd love to see some reports that really talk about learning theory and how that can apply to best practice in terms of app design. And I actually, in a year, I'd love to have seen the app stores do something really significant around helping folks who are looking for stuff that really is educational, and proven to be educational, helping, educators and parents find that.
I think it's next year maybe time for some sort of smaller self-regulating body of some sort. I think it's grown to the size where there are medium-sized companies doing this and a lot of people sort of aspiring to head into it, yet we're not big enough to have anyone really speaking for us as a group. I think the copper law and everything that preceded that was very clear that we have nobody speaking for us, which is a serious problem, especially when these sorts of issues come up. That there are initiatives, Moms with Apps is a great one, for instance, which are doing certain things, but I think maybe there's room for something more and something which is slightly more professionalized to take care of these things together, like the challenges that we all face, and maybe in a year's time, then the time would be right for that, something like that, I think.
Yeah, I would just recap what Carly said about findability, curation, improvements in the App Store, helping parents find what they need, helping teachers find what they need, and anything that ensures that quality rises to the top.
I think I would echo that. I think that the App Store thus far has been, relatively speaking, a pretty democratic platform that has enabled 1 to 2 person shops to rise to the top with high quality content. So I'd love to see how, in the next few years, that it doesn't just become dominated by folks with the biggest marketing budgets. And that, because I think there's a lot of room for innovation still, and often it's easiest to innovate when you're a small or medium-sized company. And so I think there's still a lot of room for that.
And I guess also for education, I think what I'd like to see happen is some consideration of the fact that shared iPads are the norm, or shared tablets, and most apps don't play well if 8 kids are going to share that tablet, and that's a real challenge and a struggle. I'm sure we'll come back to that over the next couple of days, but this idea that I can pick up a tablet and use it because it's mine is not real world for most school children or their teachers.
And I'm going to throw in as mine, this may be selfish given the work that I'm doing now, both with PlayCollective and also through the Fred Rogers Center where I'm a senior fellow, but I hope we evolve further a common vocabulary about how we define and describe quality in children's digital media in touchscreen-based technologies. Two things that I didn't get to on the panel that I hope you'll be talking about over the next couple of days. One is very specifically what the influence of the new COPPA rules will be, how that's going to influence the development process, the marketing process, really down to very specifics there. And the second is I'm seeing a resurgence of co-play and co-viewing and media products developed to encourage that. We have a generation now of parents who grew up with digital technology, who share that with their kids instead of it being a separating thing. So I hope we'll talk in the next couple of days amongst ourselves or in general about the role of co-play as well. Anyone who's been to AppCamp before should probably be very worried about this time that we're actually on time. So I'm going to turn it back over to Warren and give Björn a minute to collect his thoughts and get ready to give his keynote. But thank you very much for a wonderful start. Please thank our panel.